I will be discussing solving quadratic inequalities. On the first example, it's showing as less than or equal to 0. I'm going to eventually just set the entire problem equal to 0 or inequality equal to 0. What I want to do is, since I'm trying to solve, I want to go ahead and factor since it's a quadratic. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use the factoring by grouping method. Negative 2x squared is my first term. I'm going to leave some space. Plus 9 is my last term. And as I said, I'm going to set it equal to 0 because I'm solving. What I want to do is I want to take those two numbers and I want to multiply them. And I'm trying to find two numbers that will not only multiply to give me negative 18, but they will add to give me this middle term, negative 3, which I'm trying to replace. So I already know 6 times 3 is 18, but I have to be aware of the signs. I need a negative 18. The way the rule works is the bigger number will take the sign of the middle term that I'm trying to replace. So since 6 is the bigger of the two, negative 6, and then I test it, times positive 3 is negative 18, and negative 6 plus 3 does in fact equal that negative 3 that we're trying to replace. Well, the negative 3 has an x, so therefore when I replace it with these two numbers, I also have to add the x with it. And as I stated, we're going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to take the first two terms and I'm going to find the greatest common factor, which is a negative 2x. What I want to do is I want to divide each of those terms by what I just said is the greatest common factor, and what's left over is x. Pay attention to this sign whenever I factor out a negative sign because it's going to change. It's now positive, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. I go to the next two terms and I factor out the greatest common factor, which is positive 3. I'm going to divide both terms by that positive 3, and I'm left with x plus. Now notice here, 9 is by itself. It doesn't have an x. That's a common error. Some students usually try to take an x out here. That's incorrect because there's not an x with a 9. So 9 divided by 3 is positive 3. If you are factoring correctly, what you will notice is that you have a greatest common factor that is the exact same inside of the parentheses. If the signs are off, check to make sure that if you took out a negative greatest common factor, that you remember to change the sign inside the parentheses. So once I take the greatest common factor out, which again is this x plus 3, what I notice is I'm left with negative 2x plus 3. So what I want to do is just put that in its own set of parentheses. You do not have to put it in this order. I just like to have that's just how I like to set mine up. And because we're solving, we're going to set each of our factors equal to 0. And then I'll show you how to set up, graph your number lines and so on and so forth. So I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. I'm left with negative 2x is equal to negative 3. Once I divide both sides by negative 2, this turns into a positive 3/2. On this side, this is simply just changing the sign. What plus 3 will equal 0? So it's going to be the opposite sign, which is negative 3. When I get those two answers or solutions, I'm going to go ahead and draw out a number line so that I can graph it. I'm going from left to right, so I'm going to start off with negative 3, and then on the opposite side, I'm going to use 3/2 because that's what I said my x values are. Going back to my original problem, you want to pay attention to your inequality. If it has the equal portion under the less than or greater than sign, you would need to have a closed circle. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to close the circle on negative 3 and on 3/2. What I want to do next is I've already put it in the calculator. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You go to y equals. For your first y sub 1, you put in what was on the left-hand side, which started off with that negative 2x squared minus 3x plus 9. And then on the right-hand side of the inequality, you're going to go down to y sub 2 and enter that information. Once you do that, go to your table, which is located under second graph, and you want to test out values. Otherwise, you're just going to have to take each of, you're going to have to go from something in this range, and this range, and substitute it into your original problem. So you'll be doing the work like 3 times versus just entering it into the table and just checking all at once. So what I want to look for is any number that comes before -3. So let's just say -4. So I go to my calculator and it says -11 and 0. What I am looking for is that statement true? It initially told me that, let's just go back to it. There we go. It told me initially that -2x² minus 3x plus 9 is less than or equal to 0. So when I went over and I checked for -4, -11 is in fact less than or equal to 0. So I know that this portion is going to be shaded in. Then I want to test something in this area. So a number that comes before -3 and after -3 that's going greater towards 0. We'll just use 0 actually. Let's go down to 0. Is 9, if I'm going over to the right, is 9 less than 0? If this is not true, then that portion won't be shaded. So in this case, it's not true. And then finally, 3.2, well, we can just go to 2 and check this one. Is -5 less than or equal to 0? Yes, it is. So therefore, we know that this section or this range is also going to be highlighted. So that's how you would actually use your graph on a number line. Now, what if you were asked to write it as an inequality? What you would do is you would say that x can be anything that is less than or equal to -3. And the reason it's equal to, again, is because it's a solid or closed circle. And let's go ahead and write this -infinity and +infinity over here. And on the opposite side, x can be anything greater than or equal to 3/2. So in one case, x is smaller, and in the other case, x is larger. Now, for my classroom purposes, I want you to write it in interval notation. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at the actual graph. And when it is using infinity, you're going to use a parenthesis. So -infinity to -3, but -3 is included. So we're going to use a bracket. Union, another bracket, 3/2, and this goes all the way to +infinity. And you do not have to put the plus sign. I just do that. It's understood if you just write infinity that it's positive. So that is how you would write this as interval notation. Make sure you understand terminology, interval notation. So if you see that in your direction, this is graphing on a number line. And the other one is writing it as, and this one is inequality notation. Make sure you understand what your teacher wants, which form your teacher wants you to use. Okay. Example 2, same thing. I'm trying to go ahead and set this equal to 0. So let's go ahead and start moving things over. I'm going to move 5x over and 6 over, which means I have to take the inverse, change the signs, and I am subtracting both. I am left with x² plus 13x plus 40. I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to 0. And I want to go ahead and factor, but for those people who don't like the factoring by grouping, let's go ahead and use a box. I'll alternate between the two. First term goes in the first box, last term goes in the last box. I multiplied the two numbers. It's understood to be a 1 here. I don't have to write that, but it's just understood. So 1 times 40 is going to give me a 40. What two factors will multiply to give me a +13 when I add it? Well, we know 8 plus 5, and 8 times 5 is also 40. So I don't have to adjust the signs. I'm good. Plus 8x and plus 5x is what will go into the boxes. Factoring to the left, what is the greatest common factor on the first row? It's x. And now you can just say x times what is x squared? X. And then x times what will give me positive 8x? And that's simply plus x. Going to the bottom, x times what will give me positive 5x plus 5. And then you'll see 5 times 8 is positive 40. So I can go ahead and take those factors, which is x plus 8 times x plus 5. And that's what we just brought out for those people that are wondering where that came from. And now solve for x. What will make the first factor equal 0? The opposite sign, negative 8. What will make the second one? Again, the opposite sign, negative 5. So now if we were graphing this on a number line, I'm going to go from left to right. Now, when we're counting with negative numbers, the larger the number in front. Now, the negative sign in front of a larger number is counting, it's the opposite of what you might think. So the numbers are increasing from negative 8 all the way down to negative 5, and then it'll eventually get to 0 and then start counting positive numbers. So make sure you're aware of that. Now what I want to do is I want to look at my inequality that I started with. It's less than. It does not have the equal sign, so I'm going to just go ahead and make this an open circle. And then I want to go back to my calculator, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out what's shown here and type in on the left-hand side, I had x squared plus 18x plus 46. And then on the right-hand side, I had 5x plus 6. Let's double check, yes. All right, second graph. I just said that I'm going to use negative 8. So I want to pick any number that's before negative 8 and see if it works, if it is in fact less than. So negative 9, is negative 35 less than negative 39? No, it is not. You have to watch the counting. So between negative 8 and negative 5, we'll just pick negative 6. So if we go down to negative 6, ask yourself the same question. Is negative 26 less than negative 24? No, it is not. Yeah, no, it's not. Actually, it is. It is. Sorry. So I have to look at this. This is what I'm saying. This can be confusing. So just so you'll see, negative 26, is it less than negative 24? Yes, it is, because with the negative sign, the bigger number comes first, and then it's smaller. All right, so I already know that any number that's in between negative 8 and 5 is going to work. And just for test to help you out, let's just find some random number that's after negative 5. 0. So is 46 less than 6? Now this one is, no, that's not true. So we know that it's not going to be shaded on that side. Based off of what we have shown on our graph, we can now say that negative 8 and negative 5 will be on the outside. X will be sandwiched in between. So X is larger than negative 8, but it is smaller than negative 5. So again, make sure you understand this is inequality notation. For my class, I wanted an interval notation. So what you're going to do, since it's an open circle, you're going to use parentheses, negative 8. And since X is sandwiched in between, you just write negative 5 parentheses. And that's it for this answer. Moving on to the next one, example 3. We have 2 more examples. So 4 examples. Again, I'm just going to start the process again. I'm going to subtract 15x on both sides. And that leaves me with x squared plus 8x plus 12. And I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'm looking for 2 factors that will multiply. Use our box again. So I have x squared plus 12. So 1 times 12 is 12. Two factors that will multiply to give me 12, but they would also add to give me 8. We know that's 6 and 2. The signs are already correct. So plus 6x, and it doesn't matter if I put the 2x there and the 6x down here, it doesn't matter. It'll still work. All right, going to the left, first row, I can factor out an x. Second row, I can factor out a positive 2. And then x times what is x squared? X times what is 6? Plus 6, and that works. 6 times 2 is 12. I have my factors. So I can just go ahead and set them equal to 0 and solve. It's going to be the opposite sign, -6, -2. Go ahead and draw my number line starting from left to right. Remember, the bigger number, when it has a negative sign, comes first. And since it's a greater than symbol, inequality, I'm going to use an open circle. Let's be consistent here. Open circle. And then I'm going to test it. I'm looking for some values, but before I can look for values, I have to go back to y equals, clear out anything that's there. You don't have to do this each time. You could manually just, again, take any number that falls in between 6 and -2 and test that out, and then vice versa. Anything that's on the left of -6, anything on the right of -2, but you would have to substitute this 3 times. So just go ahead and put in the table. That's the best way for me. So I am typing in x squared plus 23x plus 12 for my y sub 1. Y sub 2 is what's on the opposite side of your inequality. And then I go to my table and I'm just testing it. So any number before -6, let's go with -7 or where we're at, that's fine. And we're asking ourselves, is that number for y sub 1 greater than what's in y sub 2? Is -108 greater than 120? Yes, it is -120. This is the tricky part. So yes, it is. So I know this side is going to be shaded. And I can go ahead and check in between -6 and -2. Let's just grab -4. Is -64 greater than -60? No, it is not. And then finally, I can check any number after -2. I will go with 0. It's just easier. Is 12 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So that means that any number on this side is also included in my solution. That is how you actually label it, graph it on a number line. So let's go ahead and see what it would look like as an inequality. X can be any value, and then we'll go back up to, it says greater than here. Okay, so X can be, just making sure it wasn't an equal to, even though I see my circles here. X can be any, put this in here too, value that's less than -6. And it can also be any value that's greater than -2. As a interval notation, parentheses, negative infinity to -6. This time I'm using parentheses because it's an open circle. Another set of parentheses after my union, -2, and I'm going to positive infinity this time. So this interval notation does not have brackets at all. It's all parentheses. And our final example, going to move this 4x over. So take the inverse, 4x squared, I should say, -4x squared. And I am left with 4x squared minus 16x plus 15. And I'm just going to change this to equal to 0. Going back to factoring with grouping, I'm going to take my first term, 4x squared, and my last term, plus 15. Over to the side somewhere, I'm just going to multiply those two numbers, and I see that it's 60. Looking for two values that will not only multiply to give me 60, but will add to give me -16. Well, we know it's 10 and 6. And I said a few minutes ago, the larger number of the two takes the sign of the middle term. So 10 is the larger sign. But if I try to multiply this out, now I will get a negative 60. So I need to change the 6 to a negative as well. So negative times negative will give me a positive, but negative 10 plus negative 6 will give me the negative 16. I'm going to replace, and it doesn't matter which number comes first. Just make sure you add the x with it. So negative 6x. We're going to go 2 terms here, and then we're going to do the same with the next 2 terms, factoring out the greatest common factor. The first 2 terms, the greatest common factor is 2x. And once I divide each term by that 2x, I'm left with 2x minus 5. And then I can factor out a negative 3 here. And again, you have to pay attention. You're going to have to change that sign. So 6x divided by that 3 is leaving me with a positive 2x. I know I'm going to have to change this sign. 15 divided by negative 3 is negative 5. If I'm doing it correctly, what's in the parentheses will look exactly the same because that's my new greatest common factor. And that is 2x minus 5. What's left over is the 2x minus 3. So I'm going to put that in its own set of parentheses. And again, it does not matter which one comes first. All of this is set equal to 0. I'm going to solve. The easiest way to solve is to literally just take the inverse of your constant. So it's now a positive 3 and then divide it by what's in front of your x. Otherwise, you will just set each factor equal to 0 and then solve that way. The inverse of my constant, positive 5, divided by what's in front of x. Now I want to go to my number line and put it in the order that it comes first. So 3/2 will come first because that's the same. That's approximately 1.5. And 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So now I'm going back to my original problem and I'm looking and I see that the inequality has an equal sign to it. So therefore I know that I'm going to have closed circles. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going back to my calculator, clearing out what's here. Oops. And entering the correct information in, which is 8x squared minus 16x plus 15. That's what's on the left-hand side. And then I go to y sub 2 and I put what's on the right-hand side. And that was 4x squared. Go to my table, second graph, and then I just test values. So I know I'm just going to test the middle. 1.5, between 1.5 and 2.5 is 2. So let's just go to 2 and see if this is true. If I just went to 2, is 15 less than or equal to 16? Yes, it is. So I already know that this is my area that I'm going to shade in. You could go and test the other ranges as well, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And well, as far as graphing, and then as far as my inequality notation, I already know these two numbers are going to be on the outside and x is going to be sandwiched in between. 3/2 is less than or equal to, because I see closed circles, x. X is going to be less than or equal to 5/2. That is when it's an inequality notation. As an interval notation, because it's closed circles, go ahead and use your brackets, 3/2, comma, 5/2, bracket, the end. Thumbs up, subscribe. Have an awesome day.